Hello everyone. Today we will learn about what matter is. Matter is anything that has mass and occupies a space. So therefore, matter is anything that has both mass and volume. Some examples of things that are matter would be a chair, a person, water, and air. Yes, air. Things that are invisible to the human eye might still have mass and volume. Things that are not matter would be various forms of energy. For example, light and heat are both not matter. They do not have a mass or volume they occupy. There are different ways that we can describe matter. We can describe it qualitatively, which is to give a more general description of it. For example, the chair is red or the pillow is soft. Or alternatively, we can give a quantitative description, some sort of description that involves a number. Usually this is going to be an amount, but is not always. For example, my cat weighs 15 pounds, or I drank 250 milliliters of water yesterday. These are both quantitative descriptions of something that is matter, either the cat or the water. There are 7 basic measurements and their accompanying base units that have been agreed upon by the Système International, or the SI system. Basically, a bunch of scientists got together and decided to come up with some standards. We will now take a look at what those 7 basic measurements are. One of the 7 base units is length, which is a measure of the size in one dimension. So for example, the length of a table or the length of a football field. Units for this would include things like meters, centimeters, inches, feet, miles. All of these are measurements of length. The official Système International base unit for this, however, is the meter. Another of the 7 is temperature. Temperature is technically a measure of the amount of the average kinetic energy for the particles in a sample. There are various temperature units, including Kelvin, which is the SI unit for this, Fahrenheit, which is the units we use here in the US, and Celsius, which is used in other countries and also usually in labs. Another of the 7 units is mass, a measure of the amount of matter that is present. Appropriate units for mass would include kilograms, grams, milligrams, micrograms, nanograms, basically anything that has grams and a prefix. The official SI unit for this is a little bit different than usual. It is kilograms. Most of the others, you'll notice, do not have prefixes for their base units. This is the only one that does. Please note, pounds are not a measurement of mass. They are a measurement of weight. Weight and mass are not identical. Weight is actually a kind of force. We'll discuss force a little bit later on in this video. Another of the base units is luminous intensity, which is a measure of how bright something is. The units for luminous intensity are the candela, abbreviated capital C, lowercase d. Another of the 7 base units is amount of substance, which generally is a measure of the amount of particles that are present. The SI unit for this is the mole, abbreviated MOL. We will talk more about moles in a later unit. Another of the 7 base units is time, which is difficult to define, but one way to define it is the measure of the ongoing progression of events. Appropriate units for time might include seconds, hours, years, centuries, millennia, but the official SI unit for this is seconds, abbreviated S. Another of the 7 base units is electric current, which is a measure of the flow of electrons through a system. The units for electric current are amperes, abbreviated with a capital A. So you'll notice there's a lot of units of measurement that you're probably familiar with that were not mentioned, and also one that was mentioned as simply not appropriate for its category. If there is a measurement that is not connected to one of the 7 base measurements, it is called a derived unit, since in some way it can be derived or connected to one or more of the 7 base units. There are many, many, many derived units, but some common examples that you may have run across or that we'll talk about more in this class include pressure, which is an amount of force applied over an area. Force, we'll talk about in a moment, is connected to a couple of different base units, and area is a derived unit of length. It is length squared. Some appropriate units for pressure would include pascals, which is the SI unit for this, bars, which is more commonly used on things like the Weather Channel, atmospheres, which is the most commonly used unit, torr, and millimeters of mercury, which are basically the same unit and the oldest unit, and PSI, or pounds per square inch, which are the pressure units used for tires on cars. Force is a measure of acceleration and mass. It's the amount of acceleration applied by an object, basically. Acceleration is connected to length and time, and mass is one of the 7 units. So force is connected to length, time, and mass, 3 of the base units. Weight, as I mentioned earlier, is an example of a force. It is the amount of force due to gravity as the acceleration pulling down on an object. This is why your weight on the moon is different than your weight on Earth, because the moon has about 1/6 the gravitational acceleration. Appropriate units for force might include newtons, which would be the SI unit, or pounds, which is the unit we traditionally use for weight. Volume is also a derived unit. It's a measure of size occupied in 3 dimensions, so it is derived from length cubed. And so there are many units that are appropriate that are directly connected to that, like centimeters cubed, feet cubed, and anything along those lines. There are also some other measurements that are more commonly associated with fluids, such as liters or milliliters, cups, fluid ounces, gallons. These are all also units of volume, units for volume. Another derived unit is density. Density is a measure of the mass that occupies a space. We will talk more about density in another video, but some appropriate units for density might include grams per centimeter cubed, kilograms per liter, grams per milliliter, grams per gallon, anything where there is a mass divided by a volume. So density is connected to mass and length.